Howard Yu is a Lego professor of management and innovation at the IMD Business School. Howard, welcome back to the show.
Great to be here. Thank you.
Okay, Howard, so how do we read this right now? We've talked about the numbers on the earnings. We've looked at how the disappointment on the revenue side fits into what we heard from Snap. But more conceptually, the news flow and the narrative, one could argue, has been responsible for some of the price action. Is that story going away?
That story is not going to go away. Facebook is really hitting the watershed point, I think, because companies live or die, whether they thrive successful or becoming disdained based on their likability. Now, in the past, Facebook is really a likable company. People loves it. And all of a sudden, with all these Facebook paper, what is established is the bad motive inside the company is no longer innocent. For the longest time, Mark Zuckerberg saying, my platform is neutral. What it shows is not neutral. And so all this casts a big doubt around how much this company would have the right to operate, in the sense that how much leeway they have to innovate in other space. And so this is a big shadow overhanging this tech giant right now.
How does this most recent slew of information differ from what we were discussing for Facebook 18 months or 2 years ago? It seems like we go through a cycle here. The delete Facebook campaign, they skewed the election, they did this, they used Cambridge Analytica for this or that. Every time, stock just keeps on going up. So as investors, why should this time be any different?
I think this time is different. First and foremost, is a coordinated release. So all of a sudden, it's really on the headline. Whether you're media on either side of the spectrum, you keep on writing articles around Facebook right now. And the second is this internal document really illustrate that the top management team actually know what is happened. In the past, it's sort of like, okay, this scandal happened and that scandal happened. It wasn't really bad motive. They're trying to patch things up. But what these Facebook papers have demonstrated right now is that engineers have raised concern about product features that clearly hurt people, and yet Facebook continue. It's almost like a company that fully realized the negative consequence of the product and simply pay up fine whatever as a cost of doing business. Now the consequence becomes, from a regulator perspective, this is a sea change. In fact, you can pinpoint bad motive leads to bad consequence now with a deliberate action and unleashing negativity to the public. So this is a really different type of argument right now.
Howard, the argument a couple years back was that they were spreading misinformation to turn an election. I mean, that was a pretty giant claim and giant issue as well. I mean, how can it get bigger than that if they survive that? How come they don't survive this?
Well, almost like back in the election, and people thinking about, oh, this is a new thing that, Facebook may not know the big consequences. So they were unleashing, misinformation, but they never know the consequence could be as big as influencing an election. So the argument go. But right now, what we're seeing is Facebook actually know what is going on. And despite all this internal inquiry, despite all this internal research going on, Facebook continues to act insufficiently. Mark Zuckerberg continued to double down the true north matrix around growth. So as a public policymaker and regulator, you've got to ask yourself, should I really let this company to continue to unleash negativity despite they know what is happening? Now, given their core business, I still continue to believe they would be successful. But then in order to justify Facebook's share price continue to move forward, they need a heck a lot of innovation in new space, fintech, health, etc. These are highly regulated areas. With this kind of reputation, what type of regulator would allow them to go back again to dabble with fintech innovation, for instance, to dabble in healthcare? That cost them a ceiling for growth.
Howard, when we look at Facebook's position on some of these issues versus some of the other social media giants, obviously a very different tone when you compare it to Twitter, where some would argue then that Twitter's err in its own moral position or its regulatory position and banning users, exiling the president, taking a stance that certain language is unacceptable. does this not just kind of go on this merry-go-round that certain people are going to agree with the moral position the company takes and some are going to disagree? I mean, how objective does this get, or does it just remain in the realm of subjectivity where certain regulators under one administration might like one business or the next administration might not like the other? I mean, sure, there are folks that would argue that Twitter's gone too far in stifling free speech, where maybe Facebook's just let it run too wild.
Yeah, I think fundamentally it illustrates how much tone deaf some companies are and not able to capture opportunities, or some other company really knows how to play the game right now and capture opportunities. Because at IMD, we're really looking at how ready companies are for the future. For that matters, you've got to be able to read the public sentiment. And in a way, it startled me that Facebook, despite all of these warnings, they remain as if tone deaf to the general public. This is not even a fundamental or simple marketing company would do. So it's from that angle I feel extraordinarily uncomfortable, is their inability to listen to what their stakeholders want.
This is a pretty interesting point. What you're saying is that, well, if you look at what the majority believes or what the feedback is, reading the room essentially, as you're saying, okay, maybe there would be people in that room that don't think what they're doing is bad or evil, or they prefer a different platform. The overall feedback and the plurality would be that they need to do things differently so that it behooves them to respond to that. So how do you think they deal with this going forward? What do you think Facebook's move might be? It seems like, to your point here, Zuckerberg so far is fairly unapologetic and trying to move the conversation towards whatever their growth market is going to be next. So how do you think they play this? I mean, what is the next chess move we should be expecting?
Well, there are the trajectory, I think, where Facebook is going to go forward. And there are alternative trajectory. We've seen other companies committed mistake and redeem themselves, right? Pharmaceutical companies such as Johnson & Johnson, there was once upon in time, they had something to do with their drugs and they record the whole product, pulling them out of the shelf and rebrand and relaunch, and they redeem themselves. I don't think Facebook is going to come out with a huge apology and change their policy, because what you see as Mark Zuckerberg have done over the past few years, he's not going to relent. And you can understand why. As he becomes more and more lonely, he probably surrounded himself with people who only say yes to him. And that becomes a very dangerous situation for leaders, that he becomes so isolated to the outside world, to the point that you kind of look at him as like, what type of universe you're living in? And I think there is some kind of isolation element. And so I don't think Facebook is going to change its trajectory in the near term at all.
And this talk about the metaverse, I mean, it seems like that goes almost even deeper into it, right? I mean, metaverse is something built on a virtual, platform, and that's what Facebook's created, a virtual community. When they talk about going to the metaverse, is that not kind of like an implicit double or triple down on their platform being sound?
Yeah, totally, right? You're talking about building up an echo chamber, and that's essentially the ultimate echo chamber in all sense of the word. And so, it's all about building up your core capabilities. And Facebook has been so good in understanding what type of group you like, what do you like best, and really build up a feedback, internal, consistent feedback loop so that we feel comfortable. So I'm not surprised that this would be the next big thing that Facebook is trying to get at. Now, time will tell, given all these stuff going on, with regulators stepping in the name of protecting children and minors, in protecting, public policy, etc. We're putting a ceiling to Facebook innovation. Again, likability and the ability to innovate always go hand in hand. So it is a tragedy of a tech giant like this forgetting how important it is to be likable for the society.
Okay. Howard, always a good perspective and a good conversation. Appreciate you helping us try and think about what the future holds here for this business. Thanks for coming back.
Great to be here. Thank you, Oliver.
Thank you. Howard Yu is Lego Professor of Management and Innovation at IMD Business School.